thanks for inviting me to talk to you all. I feel I should start by explaining the title a little bit. I was thinking of something creative and just thinking if I were data, how might I be feeling? If I was insight, how might I be feeling? If data had feelings and emotions, I think it might be at times that saying, "Help! I'm locked in spreadsheets and PDFs. Let me out." So yeah, I think this talk will cover how we've unlocked that data in the ONS through data visualization, and as Maria says, through wider digital formats. So yeah, a little bit about the ONS. It's a national statistics organisation. We cover things on the economy, so that's GDP, unemployment, productivity, and lots more. But also the social stats as well. So population, migration, health stats. We'll see lots of examples as we go along. On that point, I've put a link on this first slide that you're welcome to put into your browser, bit.ly/RobFry EU talk. And that should take you to a Google Doc, which has lots of links to some of the examples. So you'll see lots of GIFs and lots of animations of those examples, but you won't be able to play with them yourself. So yeah, if you follow this link, there'll be URLs, and you can kind of play with the interactors and with the content as we go along. I wanted to start this talk with something quite self-indulgent and talk about my motivations and journey into data visualization. In part because I kind of see it as a kind of single case example of the journey that ONS has been on. So I've worked in various roles in ONS. I joined as a researcher or statistician to the organisation, and designing field operations for collecting census data, building statistical production systems, processing the data, releasing various statistical series, whether that's been population estimates or house price data, lots of different data that I've been responsible for publishing across ONS. In my last role as a kind of researcher statistician, I was coordinating and contributing towards big paper compendia publications, and such as the one on the screen. This was a phase when ONS was transitioning from these printed volumes and PDF journals. They're being phased out, and this was around 2011, so 10 years ago. Seems like a very long time ago now. But yeah, an example of what one of those reports might look like on that screen. At the time, I was responsible for creating a set of statistics that looked at household income at small neighbourhood level. There's a concept of middle super output areas in England and Wales, and they're groups of around 1,500 households in each. But they don't have names. They're only represented by quite not particularly descriptive codes, and you can see there on the kind of top left of the spreadsheet. Yeah, there is some naming attached to them, but actually very, very difficult for anybody to really make use of. Lots of people would perhaps take these into their GIS packages and map them. But there's a real barrier there, I think, for the average user in actually tapping into it. It was also quite limited as how we could talk about that, because we were essentially putting static formats on the web. So whilst this graphic does quite a good job at showing the spatial patterns across the country, you can see the Southeast had the highest household incomes. Perhaps not that surprising if you know England and Wales, but if I was wanting to understand what was happening in my particular neighbourhood, my particular community, how I compared to neighbouring areas, that'd be really, really, really difficult thing to do with something like this. So that's what got me into data visualization. Around the fringes of my job, I began to kind of teach myself HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and apologies to the really bad screenshot here. It's the best that I could find now, but this was one of my early creations, taking those same estimates and turning that into an interactive experience where people could put their postcode in, pan around the map, see what's happening in their particular area, and kind of a little bit of a table as well, kind of comparing some of the measures that we put on offer. Yeah, fast forward 10 years, and I'm leading a team who is doing this work as their full-time occupations. So yeah, just that journey, you kind of see that as a metaphor for the journey that ONS has been on. This is just one particular statistic, one particular release, but looking to apply these sorts of techniques and methods much more widely. So I lead a digital content team now, and at the time when I moved into it was a data visualization team. There were 5 of us at that point, and the team had been going for a few years. It was just very much focused on data visualization. Now it's grown to a team of 40, and we call ourselves a digital content team, and it's a range of different disciplines. So we've got data visualization specialists, we've got data journalists, graphic designers, social media specialists, and we're working with teams across ONS to improve their communications, and lots and lots of different approaches that we take. I think we're a fairly unique team in the context of the public sector. So yeah, hoping that sharing some of our experiences and strategies will be useful for you. In particular, this is what we tend to cover. We'll describe some of the breadth of work that the team undertakes. We'll share some of the successes we've had along the way, talk about some of the strategies, why our team was created, how that fits in with the organisational strategies, how we work within the wider organisation, and what makes good content, and finally a bit about building the skills and building the team. So what the team does, recently we've had a little bit of a restructure in our team, where we've begun to more tightly align the areas of work that we undertake under 3 main banners. So improve, partner, and innovate. And I'll talk a bit more about each of these in turn. But it was coming up with 3 words for each of these. Improve means kind of raise basic standards across the organisation. Partner is kind of making the most of those high impact analysis pieces that ONS puts out. And innovate is about exploring new formats and approaches. So starting off with improve, summing up in a few bullet points here, raising the basic standards of communication and presentation. That can take lots of different forms. That can be advice, consultancy, support. It can be bespoke intervention. We tend to focus this on the highest profile releases from across ONS, so making sure that our time is spent in the right areas. Often it's quite basic in nature, so it's about just making sure that the charting or the communication is as good as it can be, and that can sometimes be very plain formats, static formats. And then there's a role for us in developing those standards as well, documenting them, and delivering training to the organisation so they are aware of those standards and aware of the approaches that you can take. Trying to raise the base quality of communication from across ONS. So in a bit more detail, that can be effective charting at times. Simple basic charting is often very, very effective in getting across your message. It's something that sometimes I don't think you get taught at school how to create a chart. You get taught perhaps kind of opening up an Excel spreadsheet and how to physically create a chart, or maybe if you're as old as me, back in school days, you get some grid square paper and taught how to plot a line chart or plot a bar chart with a pen and pencil. But you don't get taught the strategies behind what makes an effective chart or what makes a good chart choice. So a lot of our role is just to kind of improve the standards in that space. An example of this was during the pandemic, we've been releasing a weekly deaths publication. This is something that ONS hadn't done before. Prior to the pandemic, we released weekly data on deaths, but we didn't write about that on a weekly basis. So this is a new publication for ONS. Teams generally have access to a kind of a basic charting tool to do most of their charting, and this was probably about the best that charting tool could offer initially. But looking at this, I'm kind of, from my perspective, I'm thinking there's too many colours. The users having to do quite a lot of work of moving back and forth between the legend and the lines themselves. Imagine what the eye is having to do to kind of match the colours to the lines. Is for me as a user, I'm not sure whether that spike in deaths in week 14 is unusual. How does that compare to previous years? Is that out of the ordinary, or is that something we should be concerned about? It's not particularly clear. And last of all, what is week 14? As a user, I'm assuming that it's weeks since the beginning of the year. I know that there are 4.33 weeks in a month, so it's going to be around mid-March. But yeah, having to do quite a lot of work to understand that. So we work with the team, sort of knowing that this is a very high-profile publication, lots of eyes across the country on this release, on this data, to transform that chart. So yeah, you'll see that there are fewer colours here. That we've directly labelled the lines, users aren't having to kind of to move their eyes back and forth. We have the min-max range for the past 5 years, so users can understand, well, actually these peaks that we're seeing are things that we should be very concerned about. And lastly, we've got really clear descriptive titles. If it's kind of one thing that you might take away from kind of the basic charting space is try to summarize what the chart is saying in the chart title itself. Don't always kind of default to describing the statistical measures that are in place. It kind of helps that cognitive burden of understanding what the chart is showing straight away. Just to say that we have to make these charts work equally well on mobile. We definitely see no rise over the past year, as I think more members of the general public are accessing the ONS site. But I think this is a kind of long-term trend as well, where we're seeing more and more people accessing our content via a mobile device. And yeah, since January 2020, over 60% of page views on the ONS site came via a mobile device. Sometimes we use animation, and that can be really useful to show change or progress. We're really grappling with some antibody data. The ONS runs a study where it tests samples of the population to understand whether they have COVID-19 antibodies in them. In particular, as the kind of vaccine efforts have rolled out, we're beginning to kind of track that across different age groups and across time. So lots and lots of data. We have single year of age data. Really struggling on how to show that progression of the number of antibodies that people had, and yeah, in the end settled on an animation as the best way of doing this. Show a video in a moment of the health minister of the UK using this animation in one of the government briefings that were watched by millions and millions of people on a regular basis. But yeah, really rewarding to see our work used in this setting.
We have some very exciting information for you today about the real world impact that the vaccination rollout is having. If we could have the first the slide, please. This slide shows over time the increase in the proportion of people who actually have COVID-19 antibodies. Those are the antibodies that are so crucial in our ability to fight the disease. This chart isn't measuring how many vaccines have been done. It's actually measuring the proportion of people who have the COVID-fighting antibodies swimming around in their bloodstream. This chart represents the fact that the vaccine is giving the country protection.
Which won't show you the whole video because we haven't got enough time. But yeah, can play that in your leisure when the slide links come through. But yeah, again, just really rewarding to see that see our work being used in that
and we have
in that
some
context.
very exciting information for you today.
Interactivity is a really interesting one. It's a technique that we use quite sparingly in the team. Sometimes there's a temptation for teams to want to present every cut of data that they might have, by every which way that they possibly can. But we tend to see, and we track this through some analytics on the site, that a lot of interfaces tend to have quite low engagement. So really, that combined with the time that sometimes these interactives can take together, we're really questioning where and when we use these techniques. And particularly if we're writing narratives where we're telling a story, it's important that we do choose stories that help tell that story. So often we encourage teams to focus on delivering more static graphics that tell the message. But there are a number of times when interactivity can really help, and often works best in those situations where people are motivated to find themselves in the data, or find out something about their area to for example. So this is a map that we produced again during the pandemic, where we were working with the ONS deaths team, and we could understand that there was a real demand for local area information. You could see these needs being reflected in the media coverage around that time. So we began to explore what could be done. So we created this map. This is again down to middle super output area, groups of around 1,500 households. People could put their postcode in and find out how many deaths there had been in their area and how that had changed over time. It was quite sobering to put this map together. You're thinking that actually every dot, every circle on this map is a group of people who've died, who've had their family affected. But yeah, I found it really resonated with users, and actually you could kind of see the reaction on social media where it caused people to reflect on the actions that they were taking in everyday life. So we build these maps in such a way that they can be reused and embedded widely, and we found with this particular one that pretty much every national media outlet picked this map up, embedded it into their site, and wrote stories around it. Actually, more than that, there was around 150 local newspaper outlets who picked this up and wrote about it, kind of telling the stories for individual areas. So yeah, an example of kind of how we build things and how that can then translate into wider use than just on our website itself. I think it had around 15 million views in the first 48 hours of this map going out, and a lot more since. We're also sharing our expertise in this function. So we run a style guide, a style blog, where we talk about data visualization best practice, but also kind of wider communication best practice. And so it's got there's lots of kind of material there. We blog about some of the most contentious issues around DataViz, the things that kind of come up time and time again that we can then point people towards, like, can I start my y-axis at a non-zero, those types of questions. And we'd often deliver training and practical workshops across the organisation, again trying to raise that basic level of understanding around DataViz and communication. So the next function is partner. And this is about bringing those skill sets together to work with statisticians, researchers, economists to work on analytical pieces. In particular, we have this focus on what we term the inquiring citizen, a particular user group. And, read interesting general public. It's probably the more user-friendly way of describing that group. And we're exploring a range of techniques that go beyond paper on the web. So using different digital formats to best serve that group. It's not an audience that the office is well used to serving. A lot of the office is thinking about serving policymakers directly, or central government, or academics. Those are perhaps the user groups that we're most used to serving. But as part of the strategy, and I'll cover it later, we are encouraged as an organisation to think about how the general public use and understand statistics. So this is an example of this. It's actually quite a standard article, and it's looking at how people spend their time, and then in particular how much unpaid work they do around the house or around the home. So things like homework, childcare, laundry, those types of things, and really interesting topic. I think in that it's perhaps kind of an area of things like GDP doesn't really cover, but there is real value to that work. It kind of cover things like perhaps as you might kind of typically expect, that women were doing more work than unpaid work than men, but lots of other aspects of this, kind of how that varied by age, or whether they're students or mothers, or lots of different characteristics. But yeah, we ended that article with a calculator that kind of allowed people to put their own the number of hours that they spent on different activities. We work with statisticians to give that work a value. I think we looked at the median earnings for kind of occupations in that space and kind of downrated that a little bit. But yeah, it caused a lot of interest, this piece, and I suspect probably lots of arguments within the household as well, as sort of people comparing the work that they did. Again, lots and lots of coverage, kind of quite widely across the media. I think we even made the front page of the Financial Times. Another example, again, more coronavirus focused. This was a time when certain professions would be encouraged to return to work, but lots of questions and debate as to whether that was the right thing to do. Lots of people the public were worried about kind of their risk, like how risky was kind of returning to work for them. Would they be exposed to coronavirus? So we did this piece that looked at data from more normal times about how different professions were exposed to disease, or exposed to the general public. This is again part of a much wider piece that looked at some of the groups of occupations and some of the characteristics. But they had this interactive here where people could select the occupation of interest to them, and begin to explore that, kind of begin to form a view for themselves. It's not surprising that things like occupations like doctors and nurses were in the very top right-hand corner there, most exposed to disease and most exposed to the public. But yeah, people could also find themselves in that. Again, strong use across the media. It formed a package on a political broadcast show where they had MPs on discussing this data, really a discussion around whether kind of the return to work was the right thing to do on them. In the interest of time, I'll skip over that video. Often different formats as well. Quite keen on challenging people's perceptions. Sometimes people's perceptions of the world or their community are formed by things that they pick up on the media or things that they pick up on the news, and sometimes they can be at times overblown. So exploring formats like this where we ask people to kind of invest in what they think is happening in the world, and then in this draw your own chart example is then revealing what the actual trends were. But because people have invested in their time in kind of thinking for themselves what might happen, perhaps the impact of the reveal is more surprising to them. So the last area of our team is the Innovate function. And that's all about researching new formats and new techniques to make data useful. It's quite a new area for us in that we've never had a dedicated team, especially on this, because we've been doing the development at the time of a particular project, but sometimes that's not ideal in that sometimes you need to deliver it quickly, and the development time behind some of these things is longer than the time that you need to deliver them. And also just thinking more strategically as well, what formats can we develop that can be reused time and time again, not for a one-off project. But products that kind of are revealing insight that better serve particular user groups. The idea is to try lots of different things and fail fast, or actually hopefully deliver really impactful content. The aim is to inspire the organisation as well, show people the future direction for this transition to digital. Initially, this focused around 2021 census outputs. So scrollytelling is something we've been exploring. This was a piece looking at income deprivation, where people were invited to select their local authority, their area of interest, and then revealed how income deprivation was playing out in their area. So it's a format that we really like because often we're dealing with quite complicated concepts within ONS. And so this idea of layering on explanation and using the visuals to tell the stories in a way that can be difficult to explain with words alone is really impactful. And we're combining this with robo-journalism as well, delivering, if you can imagine, it's really difficult to tell stories for 360 different local authorities. But this approach we use some automation to kind of tell the story that is particular for a different area. And it's not just explanatory formats that we're looking at, we're also looking at exploratory formats. This is a prototype of a census data visualization atlas that we're working on, where people can select the variables of interest to them. Actually, also just recognizing that sometimes our geographies don't always match the decisions that people need to make on the ground itself. Another prototype here that we're exploring, where people are allowed to physically draw the areas of interest to them, and then we'll return some information, some data, some insight about that area that they've drawn. So just I think I've shown you some successes as we've gone along, but to put some stats, because I work in the stats office, so we love stats. 1 in 2 users of ONS website encountered an interactive built by the team, and I think that's pretty incredible given the size of the team relative to the organisation and the fact that our content is on a small fraction of pages. Our work is used kind of much more widely than just the website itself. We've had 15 million page views off-site this month, and that's as much as the ONS website gets in a whole month. Collaborative pieces that we work on engage kind of 3 times as many users than the standard articles that come out from ONS. So some real signs of success that our team are working well. Strategies. So wanted to start from the top down here and kind of explain some of the reasons for the creation of our team. So in the UK, there is a various committees across government, and in particular this one, the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee, is appointed by the House of Commons to look at constitutional issues, and in particular the quality and standards of administration provided by civil service departments. And in particular, there was an inquiry into the public trust in government statistics back in 2012. This is one of the quotes from that hearing, where the head of ONS is invited to talk to MPs and to other civil servants about the work of the ONS. Yeah, and the ways in which statistics are presented sometimes present a challenge, even for expert users, and the lay user is left confused and disengaged. There are more along these lines. There are further hearings, further inquiries. Statisticians spend too long explaining what's happening to the numbers when they should be explaining what is going on in the real world and why. Sorry about that. Official stats must be presented in a way that is easy for non-experts to use. There are improvements, but there's much more to be done. So quite powerful statements there. That led to a number of organisational strategies, the latest being the Statistics for the Public Good, where there is a very big focus on communication. Some more quotes from this, from this kind of latest strategy. The idea that analysts need to work to develop their role as communicators. The statisticians and analysts should be confident in their ability to provide that impartial view of the world. So this is a strategy that covers the whole of the government statistical service, and ONS is just a part of that, but the biggest part of the government statistical service. Actually, I think ONS is quite lucky because of its size to have a team like ours who is focused and dedicated to communication. So I think actually we are working very closely with those statisticians and analysts, as you've seen, to make sure that we are making that content as good as it can be, and not actually putting all of the burden on statisticians and analysts to do that work themselves. So a little bit about some of the strategies that we employ in the team. I think if there's one thing that I would encourage any team in this space to do, it would be to understand the needs of different user groups. As well as you can. This was a screenshot from a user testing session where people were looking at content that our team had created, understanding some of the challenges that they faced, whether they liked it, whether they were engaged with it, whether they found it useful, whether it helped them, whether they had any challenges using the content itself that we could then play back into future developments. Which is, we don't test everything like this. We often use on-site surveys, things like SurveyMonkey. We're often studying analytics about what is and isn't being used and how it's being used, but we're using all of this information collectively to build that back into our approaches. So that might be refining individual pieces of content, or just feeding that back into our knowledge so that we know when a new project comes along, some of the pitfalls, some of the strengths of different approaches that we might take. So over time, we've built that up to introduce the concept of user personas. So we've got these 6 user personas defined at the moment, all the way from the technical user who is using APIs to interact with the data, perhaps not using the website directly, down to the passive citizen. Perhaps those people don't even interact with the ONS website, but they consume our content off platform. But yeah, we're using these personas to build up that picture of our users. What are their common needs? What are their typical behaviours? And thinking about them as we design our new content. Understanding how people get to our content is really important. It's definitely informed a lot of our approach and our shift to digital. 60% of ONS traffic came via Google in the past year. That's definitely one of the reasons why we don't publish via PDFs, so that the content on that web page can be indexed by Google and can be found. This is an analysis we did some time ago before the pandemic, where we were looking at different IP addresses of people who've accessed the site. So we could begin to categorize IP addresses into whether it was a home broadband connection, whether it was schools, universities, mobile broadband, government, consultancies, businesses. But that begins to kind of give that broader picture of who is accessing the site, and then how we might be catering for the different needs of those quite diverse range of users.
Sorry to interrupt, Rob. You have 5 minutes to Q&A.
I've seen. We're close to finishing.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Understanding how your users consume your content as well. So 60% of ONS traffic came via mobile. I said that earlier in the presentation. 75% of users made it no more than a quarter of their way through the average publication. I think I said earlier again, people don't tend to interact with interactive content unless they're personally motivated to find some information about themselves or about that particular area, and that we are getting this high usage beyond the website. I mean, how does this translate itself? It means that we try to build content for the platforms that the users are consuming that on. This is the same antibody animation that we showed earlier, but this was a screenshot of it embedded in the publication, where people could play, they could pause, they could control that animation. This is how it would look on desktop. But thinking about how would that change for social, that we had that same animation just playing on social media. We designed it for a different aspect ratio, so it fitted the space that Twitter gives you. We use bolder colours to capture the attention of readers as they are scrolling through a busy timeline, perhaps. One of the most effective techniques we take is the idea of personalisation. It's sometimes hard to, as a public organisation where we're not telling emotional stories, to make people feel that connection with their own lives. The idea of calculators. This is a crime calculator where people could put in some details about themselves and find out their risk of particular crimes. Can encourage that connection with the story or with the data. It can help people understand that data for themselves. And making that shareable, embeddable, reusable. You see we've got social links at the end of that. Whenever we've got interactors on the site, we're designing that content to be reused. We've got the embed codes. We're actually designing in quite a plain way, so that if people do pick up this content and reuse it on their own sites, that it perhaps doesn't jar with the branding, the style that a particular organisation has. We build for mobiles, we build to high standards, we build things that are quick to load, that are responsive, that work on different devices, that meet various accessibility standards. Again, I think kind of users have high expectations these days, and they expect a slick experience. So finally, a little bit about building a team. I think one of the most important things in this space is building trust with your organisation. I think we were kind of a new function, a new team in the organisation when we started. We started by working with willing partners who could really see and appreciate the benefits that we brought to the table. From that point onwards, we kept highlighting the value of the team. We shared success with other parts of the organisations. That might be briefings, week notes, it might be blogging on some of the approaches that we've taken, sharing our thinking with others, and hopefully, understanding that our work is important. hiring from building from within the organization was really important for us, that we gave people the space to learn, to develop these techniques and these approaches. And that actually helped really in building that trust with the organization, because we had people who had established networks, who could talk the language of the statisticians and researchers across the ONS. But also bringing in those ready-made skills from outside the organisation, those who could be seen as experts and really bringing something new. It might be a long journey. I think it's definitely a cultural shift from print to digital. Don't expect that change to happen overnight. You think about kind of some of the more public examples of that. I think a new newspaper has switched from paper to online overnight. It's been a gradual transition. It's about building skills. It's about convincing the organisation. It's about changing the way that things are done or have always been done. I think the reason it's a never-ending journey, I think, is that the digital world is evolving. There are always new possibilities that can be taken advantage of. So yeah, building a team with a passion for change, who have a vested interest in success, is also been really important to us. Yeah, the last point here is make time to innovate, to change. I think if no one expects a public organisation to be at the forefront of new digital formats or techniques, but I think there is a need to kind of keep up and change and innovate. Otherwise, you would become stagnant. At the same time, don't be afraid to fail. You always think about what the successes might be for a particular format or a particular approach. If things aren't working, don't be afraid to give up on something, and it will help refine your approaches and use all that user insight that we talked about earlier, to learn what works and what doesn't work. Yeah, and that's the end of the presentation. Questions?
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Rob. We do have questions from what I see in the chat. Let's slowly start. Carla from the Research and Development DG wants to know, all this that you are showing is nice, the interactive charts and everything, but how can we make it? Which tools can we use to make it?
Sure. So we tend not to use off-the-shelf software for a lot of our work. We've over time it has taken time, but I think these skills are more readily available than they have been in the past. We've built up a team who are effectively kind of front-end developers, so kind of having a knowledge of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and in particular we use a JavaScript library called D3. You might have come across, might have heard of, and so for some of the mapping we use Mapbooks GL, which is another way of building some of the kind of the mapping and interactive experiences that we've had. We definitely learn from others. There's a kind of a really big community, particularly active in the data journalism space, I would say. So we use we learn from others. We often don't start from scratch. We often pick up projects that others have done and adapt them for our needs. Having said that, if you wanted to kind of take a step back and kind of think about some of the things that you can do in a more of a point and click kind of GUI experience, Mapbox offer a studio package, a piece of software that can be a little bit more intuitive to get into, and there are lots of charting tools. I'd recommend things like Data Wrapper or Flourish as websites that can help you do some of the basics perhaps much better than packages like Excel or some of the things you might have on your desktop could do.
Also in our DataViz training series, because they are free to use, let's say, and easy to to learn, the basics first on them.
Yeah.
Dina would like to know if you can remind us what are the profiles, the roles of the people in your team, and if I may add to that question, could you be more specific, like give us numbers? You said that there's a team of 40 more or less people, but what's the distribution of roles? How much of work involved is technical? How much is communication? How, what's the mix, let's say, in your team?
So yeah, there are, so we've got data visualization specialists, data journalists, graphic designers, social media specialists. There are around 40 of us in total. We're really lucky to have a team of that size. We are serving an organization of more than 5,000 in ONS, so small in proportion to the overall size. The main bulk there of staff fall into either the data visualization roles or the data journalism roles. So off the top of my head, I think there's something like 15 to 20 data visualization specialists. I think there's something like 10 to 15 data journalists, 3 graphic designers, and 4 social media specialists, roughly. Don't quote me on that. Yeah, and I think we're wearing lots of different hats within those roles. So within, say, the data visualization specialists, some of us are more focused on using the tools or the templates that we have available to us. Perhaps that's more on the improve end of the spectrum of work, using things that are already existing to kind of raise the basic standards of communication. That Innovate function is definitely much more focused on the content, the product development, the web development side of things. That middle ground, the partnership ground, is definitely much more focused on the communication aspects. So there's probably a roughly an even split, I would say, of development, but also communication, working closely with teams, building relationships. That's also a really, really important part of the job, is kind of keeping our ears to the ground, to kind of in the right meetings to hear about what analysis is coming up, making those connections with teams, and making sure that we are focusing our time in the areas where we'll get most value for money.
Anna would like to know if you can share some good examples of robo-journalism to look at, and any links to tools available to the public. We have a couple of questions, so,
Yeah, we definitely, it's just an area we're exploring in Census around robot journalism, and there are lots of examples that we've seen and taken inspiration from, and people have approached it in very, very different ways. So yeah, I can do my best to pull together some links of different examples after the talk.
Okay, that would be great. Stefano from Eurostat would like to know a bit more about the interactive tools. How long do they last? They look fresh when they're launched, but what happens after 2 or 3 years? How important their maintenance is so that they remain in use?
Mm-hmm. So it probably depends on the product itself, or the application itself. We definitely have a range of pages on the ONS website that are they're long-standing, they're well used, they're well visited. We do our best to make sure that they are kept fresh, that they are maintained to the highest standards, the emerging standards. The standards are always changing. So they would be things like we have a life expectancy calculator. We have a World Trade Explorer looking at kind of UK connections across the world. Not hard to understand why that's interesting and important at the moment. some things that are more long-standing, and then I think you saw through some of the partnership work some things that are very short-term. They'll have a big bang when they're released. There'll be kind of news coverage around that, then the use will drop off quite quickly. We try to build in such a way that the formats can be reused. So ONS has a lot of very common data patterns across, by age, by sex, by area, by region, by lots of commonality, I think. And so, over time we've built up a series of templates that actually can be applied at quite short notice to different examples and scenarios. So whilst the overhead of creating them in the first place may be not necessarily high, but more, but it evens out with kind of reuse over the years, and actually they become easy to maintain as well, because you can kind of make an edit to the code once, and you've if something has gone wrong or it doesn't meet the latest accessibility standards, then you can kind of change it in one place, and it's easy to update across many. Most of our work is in that space, but there are some things that we do as a one-off where we imagine there'll be really high impact.
Katrinelli would like to know, you come from a public organization where normally change is not easy to achieve. How did you manage to convince your senior management of the need to embark in such a transformation journey? Or was it a top-down decision?
I think it's a bit of both. I think I shared in the slides some of the criticism.
Feeling about statistics that have to be understandable by laypersons, eh?
Yeah, exactly that. And the criticism that the organisation was getting, I think there was definitely a motivation to change and to improve the website and the kind of communication offering. The way that the team grew was we started small, and it was kind of perhaps coincidence in a way that these kind of feelings were emerging. But yeah, we grew. We showed what we could do. We showed what we could offer with a few kind of key examples, and kept sharing that. And eventually you're building momentum and change. I couldn't get the time as well, and this is kind of 10 years ago now, that perhaps there weren't many public organisations that had even begun that journey at that point. And so, sort of looking back, reflecting, if we were doing this today, there'd be a lot you could learn from other organisations, and if you wanted to kickstart it, perhaps you could kind of bring in kind of some external review of like current approaches, kind of get kind of senior management's buy-in that this was the right approach to take, and that other organisations had seen similar successes or similar changes, and this is how they did it. Like you could build up quite a picture quite quickly, I'd imagine, of what a change journey might look like now, much easier than you could have 10 years ago.
I would like to maybe ask one last question. In the European Union institutions environment, we work a lot with external contractors. In your opinion, would that be an impediment, a barrier to our digital transformation? Because I understand from what you have shown us, okay, you said several times we are lucky to have this team, etc. But you essentially internalized expertise instead of externalizing it. If you were to do it today, again, would you do it the same, or would you do it differently?
I think we do it the same. I think like it's a long journey, so it's not something that you can kind of flick a switch on and you make that move it overnight, because it's changing the way that people have done things for years and for years and years. And so yeah, I think having that expertise within the organisation, I can't imagine doing that with contract resource. I think it's also about having that passion, that desire for change. I mean, hopefully my story at the beginning was semi-inspiring about my journey into data visualization. It was very much born out of frustration with the way that, I had a real motivation myself to, and so kind of sharing that passion, sharing that motivation with the team, with the organization, I think has been really important. Like I said, my last answer, the only thing I would perhaps kind of imagine like a consultation role in would be about kind of setting some strategic direction for the organization as a whole. That I think would have given us kind of today, if I was doing it today, that would have given us a real kickstart. I think that we would have needed to have built the case so gradually, kind of build that momentum.
So if we try to boil it down to one element, where the very first step would be is strategic analysis. Maybe
that coupled with transformation of one or two areas or one or two publications, so that people could see. There's definitely something about doing and showing and telling, kind of showing impact and showing what change showing change can bring.
We are running out of time. I'm taking a couple of minutes because we waited for the 11:03 wave, so I'm taking the 3 minutes that are ours. Thank you so very much, Rob, for sharing your experience with us. A truly inspirational talk with some very useful takeaways for all your institutions and bodies. And before thanking and all of you for your participation, let me share with you some fresh news about the EU Open Data Days. Yes, the program of the conference on open data and data visualization is being shaped literally as we speak. The program committee is in session this very moment, so expect to have the program announced soon. And after this, the registrations will open in July. In the meantime, the final race for the EU Data Donors has already begun. 9 teams were shortlisted last Friday and now have to develop their proposals into a fully functional app over the next 5 months. To find out who they are and where they come from, you can visit the website and stay tuned on social media as we follow their journey and getting to know them better along the way. And on this note, thank you again. We hope you enjoyed this session and look forward to seeing you in our next webinar on 25 June. This time we will turn from the external to the internal experts for inspiration and learning. Colleagues from the Council and DG.com of the European Commission will bring to you best practices and new techniques in visual storytelling and social media communication, among others. For now, enjoy your lunch break. Thank you for staying with us those 3 extra minutes and have a great weekend.